When you look at the infrastructure of any major city, there is this overwhelming expectation of permanence.
Right.
Like it feels like pure engineering.
Yeah.
You pour a concrete sidewalk, you lay down thick asphalt for a street, you bury a heavy steel water main deep underground, and the general assumption is simply that it's static.
Yes.
It's solid, unmoving, and built to withstand the daily grind of millions of people. We like our urban environments to be predictable.
Oh, totally. We crave that predictability because, well, the alternative is chaos, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When you are moving through a dense urban grid, you rely on the concrete staying exactly where it was poured.
Yeah.
The entire foundation of modern city planning rests on the idea that once we build something, it remains inert.
But then you introduce urban forestry into that inert grid, and suddenly that predictable cityscape is entirely alive.
It really is.
It stops being a static engineering project and becomes this like slow motion collision between biology and human infrastructure. And that constant shifting tension beneath our feet and above our heads is where we are going today.
It's a fascinating area.
It is. We have a highly specific, deeply observant source guiding us through this. It's a single blog post published today, July 29, 2026, by an author who simply goes by the name Ang.
And, the level of observation in this specific post requires a bit of framing, because the title alone tells you everything you need to know about the author's perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
The post is titled Notes on Gardening, which sounds quaint, almost casual, but the subtitle is Part 970, Managing Urban Trees, Part 970.
That number stopped me in my tracks.
Right.
Think about the sheer discipline and temporal dedication required to reach the 970th installment of a series of notes on gardening. I mean, if you are writing a post a week, that is approaching 2 decades of consistent observation.
It's incredible.
This isn't someone reacting to a single news headline about a fallen branch. You are getting the perspective of someone who has been watching the slow, incremental, creeping changes in an environment over a very long timeline.
Which is exactly the timeline required to understand urban forestry. Trees do not operate on human news cycles.
No, they don't.
They operate on a scale of decades and centuries. When an author with that kind of patient, long-term observational stamina, someone who signs off their dispatches with a wonderfully retro Dear Interweb, by the way.
I loved
Yeah, when they document a trend, it carries a lot of weight. They are seeing the gradual evolution of the cityscape that most of us completely miss while we are just, rushing to work.
Okay, let's unpack this. Ang uses that long-term perspective to set up a profound contrast right at the beginning of the post. It's a tension that defines this entire issue. On one hand, Ang points out that mature trees in urban settings provide, quote, significant environmental and aesthetic value.
Yeah.
And we all instinctively know this, right? You are walking down a blindingly hot, busy street in the dead of summer, and suddenly you step under the sprawling canopy of a massive, mature oak or elm.
Oh, it's the best feeling.
The temperature immediately drops. The glare of the sun vanishes. The air quality literally feels different. The psychological and physical value of that giant tree is undeniable.
It changes the entire sensory experience of a concrete environment. And that aesthetic value isn't just about making the street look pretty for a postcard.
Right.
Those mature canopies break up the harsh, towering vertical lines of skyscrapers. They muffle traffic noise. They provide a deeply visceral connection to nature in a space that is otherwise entirely manufactured. I mean, we need those wild, sprawling canopies to make dense cities livable.
But right on the heels of acknowledging that immense value, Ang points out a seemingly contradictory reality. Over the past few years, there have been quite a few ongoing projects by the City Council on removing mature trees along the roadsides.
Yeah.
So we have these towering, highly valuable giants, and the City Council is systematically tearing them down.
And what's fascinating here is the instinct when you see a beautiful century-old roadside tree being chainsawed by city workers is to jump straight to a narrative of malicious deforestation.
Like they're paving paradise.
Exactly, paving paradise. But Ang steps back and frames this removal not as an attack on nature, but as a deeply pragmatic, often unavoidable response. The post explicitly notes that these removals happen when safety hazards or infrastructure conflicts occur.
Infrastructure conflicts. It sounds like a polite, bureaucratic way to describe a war between a living organism and a concrete city.
That phrasing perfectly captures the tightrope of modern city planning. This is the core tension we are exploring today. The precarious balance between maintaining the breathtaking beauty of wild nature and ensuring the basic functionality and safety of a densely populated urban grid.
Because biology naturally wants to expand.
Right, and infrastructure requires things to stay exactly where they are.
And according to Eng's boots-on-the-ground observations, biology is fighting a two-front war here. This isn't just a theoretical problem about roots cracking a sidewalk. The literal physical threats these mature trees pose are coming from both above and below.
Yeah, it's a vertical axis of risk.
Exactly. Let's start with a threat from above, which Eng identifies as storm risk. The observation here is that this becomes a major concern during specific weather triggers, namely thunderstorms and heavy winds. Eng notes that weakened branches or unstable root systems can collapse in heavy winds, posing safety risks.
And in a densely populated area, the consequences of that collapse are immediate and catastrophic.
Right.
We are talking about thousands of pounds of wood suspended 30 or 40 feet in the air over pedestrian crosswalks and moving traffic.
I do have to question the mechanics of this, though.
Oh.
Yeah, Eng specifically mentions weakened branches and unstable root systems collapsing when the heavy winds hit. But if a massive tree already has an unstable root system or, internally rotted branches, isn't that tree essentially a ticking time bomb anyway? Like wind or no wind? The real issue seems to be that the tree is already failing and dangerous.
Right, I see what you're saying. But to understand the specific nature of the storm risk Eng is highlighting, we have to look at the physics of a mature roadside tree under extreme kinetic load. You mentioned that beautiful cooling canopy earlier, the massive shade structure we all appreciate.
Yeah.
During a severe thunderstorm with high winds, that massive canopy stops being a source of pleasant shade and suddenly becomes an enormous, heavy sail.
A sail catching the wind.
A sail that can span 60 or 80 feet across.
Wow.
It is catching an incredible amount of kinetic energy. Now, a perfectly healthy tree with a deep, expansive, unrestricted root system can usually anchor that sail. The roots act as a massive counterweight.
Right.
But in an urban environment, roots are rarely unrestricted. They're often boxed in by a 4x4 concrete sidewalk cutout. They have been truncated to lay a fiber optic cable.
Hi.
So if there's even a slight compromise in that root plate or a branch that has weakened internally without showing obvious external rot, the tree isn't necessarily a ticking time bomb on a calm Tuesday afternoon.
Because the load is balanced.
Exactly.
The infrastructure conflict only reveals itself when the extreme weather applies massive external pressure.
The storm is the catalyst. That giant sail catches a 60-mile-per-hour gust, and the entire structure leverages against that hidden weak point at the base. The leverage applied by an 80-foot trunk against a constrained root system is immense.
It's huge.
The tree might have lived another 30 years perfectly fine in a forest, but in a city, that extreme weather turns an aesthetic asset into a multi-ton hazard.
Which explains the preemptive nature of the city council's actions. They aren't waiting for the storm to prove the tree was compromised.
No, they can't afford to.
They are assessing the wind load, looking at the constrained root space, and proactively removing the sails before the thunderstorm hits.
They are managing risk. They are calculating the devastating potential of a failure against the undeniable beauty of the canopy, and safety eventually has to win out.
Well, that covers the terrifying, highly visible threat from above. But Eng points out that there is a second primary driver for these removals, and it operates entirely out of sight.
The invisible front.
Yeah, the threat from below, root intrusion. Eng writes that this occurs when expanding root systems damage building foundations or rupture underground sewer and water lines. When you read that description, the process sounds less like biology and more like a slow-motion underground wrecking ball.
That analogy of a slow-motion wrecking ball gets right to the heart of how roots actually function. It's not a sudden, violent strike.
No.
It is a relentless, millimeter-by-millimeter exertion of hydrostatic pressure over years, sometimes decades.
Because the roots are blindly pushing through the dark earth, specifically seeking out moisture and stability.
They are following moisture gradients in the soil. And in a city, the highest concentration of moisture underground is often condensation around a cold water main or a tiny microscopic fissure in an aging clay sewer pipe.
Right.
A root hair, as thin as a thread, finds that moisture and breaches the pipe. Once inside, with access to unlimited water and nutrients, that thread proliferates. It expands into a massive root system inside the pipe, and the sheer biological pressure of those plant cells expanding is enough to snap thick municipal pipes from the inside out,
Ooh, man.
or even lift concrete building foundations entirely off their footings.
We tend to think of concrete and steel as the ultimate impenetrable materials. But given enough time, a growing root exerting constant, gradual cellular pressure will win that battle.
Every time.
And Eng makes sure to ground this abstract concept in undeniable reality. The post specifically mentions that this phenomenon of root intrusion is shown in the photo. Like, Eng actually documented the physical evidence of this underground conflict breaching the surface.
Including visual proof anchors the observation. This isn't a theoretical concern happening in a distant forest management textbook. Aang is standing on a sidewalk looking at a cracked foundation or a ruptured pipe and photographing the direct result of a sprawling root system. It reminds you that this slow-motion collision is happening right under your feet.
That magnificent mature tree, providing that beautiful dappled shade for your afternoon walk, might simultaneously be wrapping around and systematically crushing a crucial water line just a few feet below the pavement.
So you have the towering canopy risking a catastrophic collapse from above during a microburst, and the slow-motion wrecking ball dismantling the city's veins and arteries from below.
It's a lot.
The sheer scale of that two-front war makes the city council's response seem much less like malicious deforestation and more like desperate infrastructure triage.
So the underground and above-ground threats dictate the necessity of removal. The massive giants have to come down in certain high-risk corridors. But the city councils aren't just paving over the empty dirt and calling it a day.
No, they're not.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Eng observes that they are following a very specific doctrine to manage this transition, an approach centered on remove and replace. They take down the mature tree, but they actively rebuild the urban canopy with a very specific type of substitute.
The specifics of those substitutes represent a fundamental paradigm shift in municipal landscaping.
Eng lists exactly what is going into the ground to replace the giants. The post mentions younger plant species with non-invasive root systems. It further specifies replacing them with smaller ornamental species or trees with deep, contained root habits.
It's the engineering of biological replacements.
I really struggle with the trade-off here, though.
How so?
Let's look closely at what is being lost versus what is being gained. If we are systematically taking down these magnificent, towering, mature giants, the ones that provide all that profound environmental and aesthetic value, and we're swapping them out for smaller ornamental species, aren't we losing the very essence of an urban forest?
No, I mean,
Like a small ornamental tree, no matter how pretty it is in the spring, it doesn't provide the massive cooling shade of an ancient oak. It doesn't have that imposing sense of history or wild grandeur. We seem to be severely downgrading our environment just because we're afraid of a cracked sewer line.
the aesthetic loss is real, and mourning the loss of a massive street tree is a very valid response.
Thank you.
The scale of the city changes when you remove a 70-foot canopy and replace it with a 15-foot ornamental blossom tree.
Drastically.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, framing it as a strict downgrade misses the pragmatic compromise inherent in the remove and replace doctrine. The City Council is acknowledging that a completely sterile concrete environment is unlivable.
True.
Citizens need green space, the microclimate requires planting. But they also know they can no longer afford the luxury of wild, unconstrained biological growth in a densely packed grid.
So the pivot hinges on the specific biological traits of the replacements. Let's look at the language Ang uses again. Deep, contained root habits.
Contained root habits is the crucial phrase. When a city planner selects a tree with a contained root habit, they are choosing a species whose biological imperative is to send a taproot straight down deeply into the earth rather than sprawling out laterally just beneath the surface like a massive web.
They are essentially programming the roots to avoid the horizontal plane where all the sewer lines, fiber optic cables, water pipes, and building foundations live.
Exactly. They are sacrificing the immediate above-ground grandeur, those massive, sprawling canopies that stretch across 4 lanes of traffic, in exchange for long-term infrastructural harmony below ground.
This trade.
By choosing non-invasive roots and smaller ornamental sizes, they drastically reduce the storm risk because the sail catching the wind is much smaller and closer to the ground.
Right.
And simultaneously, they eliminate the root intrusion because the biological wrecking ball is directed downward, away from the horizontal infrastructure. It is a highly calculated attempt to engineer a safer, more predictable coexistence between nature and concrete.
So what does this all mean? Tracing the arc of Aang's 970th post really shifts your perspective on the entire urban landscape.
It really does.
It starts with an innate appreciation for the profound beauty and vital environmental value of a towering, mature tree. You look up at the cathedral-like canopy and feel the temperature drop. But then observation forces you to look closer. You have to acknowledge the hidden, inherent dangers.
Right.
A summer thunderstorm can turn that beautiful canopy into a deadly, multi-ton sail leveraged against a compromised base. Those strong, grounding roots are actually blindly, relentlessly crushing the city's underground lifelines.
That realization forces a painful but necessary change in policy. It forces municipal planners to adopt this calculated, almost clinical pivot toward the remove and replace strategy. They are carefully swapping out the wild, unpredictable giants for smaller, deeply rooted, highly manageable ornamental replacements.
The next time you walk down a city street, it changes what you're actually looking at.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't just look at the leaves or enjoy the shade. You should look at the trunk, look at the concrete cutouts surrounding it, and think about the intricate, invisible infrastructure humming along right below the surface. You start to see the incredibly careful, ongoing planning required to keep both the biological organism alive and the street intact.
The tension between growth and permanence is constantly being managed, usually completely out of sight, and exploring the specific shift in management strategy. This raises an important question, one that lingers long after you finish reading Aang's dispatch.
Oh, what's that?
If you extrapolate this remove and replace doctrine 50 or 100 years into the future, and city councils universally adopt this approach of swapping out mature, sprawling giants for smaller, contained ornamental species, will the fundamental aesthetic of our cities slowly, irreversibly change?
The entire scale of the urban canopy would shift.
Yes. As the old guard of massive street trees naturally ages out or is preemptively removed for safety, and they are exclusively replaced by these safe, non-invasive, smaller options, the urban landscape transforms. Will the towering, wild, unpredictable canopies of the past be permanently replaced by a highly controlled, miniature, almost bonsai version of an urban forest?
Bonsai urban forest, wow. An environment where everything is perfectly manicured, perfectly contained, and entirely safe.
Exactly.
The underground pipes remain intact, the storm winds blow safely over the tops of the ornamental leaves, and the infrastructure is perfectly secure. But we might find ourselves walking down streets completely devoid of that wild, unpredictable majesty.
We solved the problem of the slow-motion wrecking ball, and we took down the dangerous sails before the storm could catch them. We engineered a perfectly clean, predictable coexistence. But in our quest for a perfectly static, engineered cityscape, we have to ask what exactly we are pruning away.